At the party, I noticed something small that felt like a blade slipping quietly between my ribs. My name wasn't on the guest list. Not beside my husband's. Not anywhere. I stood at the entrance of the Grand Crescent Ballroom, the kind of place where chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls and every glass of champagne cost more than a week of groceries. The kind of place my husband used to dream about. Back when we built everything together. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I'd like to know how far this story reaches. Because that night, I learned something I should have seen years ago. My name is Margaret Collins, I said. The girl at the check-in table smiled. Typed. Paused. I'm sorry. I don't see you listed. I nodded slowly. My husband, Richard Collins. She found him immediately. Of course she did. But not me. No guest. No mention. Just him. That's all right, I said. She handed me a blank badge. No name. Just white space. I pinned it on anyway. Inside, the room shimmered. Laughter. Glasses. Confidence. And there he was. Richard. Perfect posture. Easy smile. And beside him, a woman. Younger. Polished. Comfortable. Her hand resting on his arm. Like it belonged there. I waited. He didn't look. Didn't search. Didn't notice. Instead, he said, "This is Claire. She's been instrumental to our expansion." Not me. Not once. I stepped closer. At the party, I noticed something small that felt like a blade slipping quietly between my ribs. My name wasn't on the guest list. Not beside my husband's. Not anywhere. I stood near the entrance of the Grand Crescent Hotel ballroom, the kind of place where chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls and every glass of champagne cost more than what I used to spend on groceries for a week. The kind of place my husband used to dream about when we were younger, when we counted every dollar and celebrated anniversaries with homemade dinners instead of catered events. I'm glad you're here. I would say now, if you were standing beside me. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from. I've learned that stories like mine travel farther than we ever expect. Because that night, I learned just how far I had been pushed out of my own life. I adjusted the sleeve of my navy dress, simple, elegant, something I had chosen carefully. It wasn't designer, but it was tasteful. My husband used to say I had an eye for things that didn't need labels to be valuable. Used to. A young woman at the check-in table looked up at me with a polite, rehearsed smile. Name, ma'am. Margaret Collins, I said. My voice came out steady. I was proud of that. Her fingers moved quickly across the tablet, then paused. A flicker crossed her face. I'm sorry. I don't see you listed here. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. That can't be right, I said gently. My husband, Richard Collins. He's one of the senior partners hosting tonight. Her smile tightened just slightly. Yes, Mr. Collins is on the list. Of course. But there's no additional guest under his name. Additional guest. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. I nodded slowly, as if this were a minor inconvenience. As if my chest hadn't just tightened in a way that made it difficult to breathe. That's all right, I said. I'll go in and find him. She hesitated, but only for a second. Then she handed me a blank visitor badge. No name. Just a white space where I should have been. I pinned it to my dress anyway. Inside, the ballroom shimmered with wealth and laughter. Crystal glasses clinked. Soft jazz floated through the air. Women in sequined gowns leaned into conversations that sounded effortless, practiced. Men in tailored suits spoke in low, confident tones about deals and expansions and things that once, long ago, my husband used to explain to me over our kitchen table. Back when he still wanted me to understand his world. I spotted him across the room. Richard, standing tall, shoulders back, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He looked exactly as he always had in moments like this, polished, admired, completely at ease. But there was something different. He wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him, younger, maybe mid-30s. Her dress was gold, catching the light with every small movement she made. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, as if it belonged there. And Richard, he didn't move it away. I stayed where I was, just for a moment. Watching, waiting. Surely, I thought, he would look up. He would see me. He would smile the way he used to, warm, proud, and gesture for me to come over. That's what husbands do, after all. Especially after 38 years of marriage. But he didn't look. Instead, a group approached him. Important people, judging by the way others subtly made space. Richard straightened even more, his voice shifting into that tone I knew so well. The one he used when he wanted to impress. And this, he said, placing his hand gently at the small of the younger woman's back, is Claire. She's been instrumental in our latest expansion. Claire smiled, poised and radiant. It's been an exciting project. Laughter. Approval. Interest. No hesitation. No mention of me. I felt something inside me go very still. Not broken. Not yet. Just still. I took a step forward. Then another. Each step measured, quiet. As if I were walking across a surface that might crack if I moved too quickly. When I reached them, no one noticed at first. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked. Someone made a joke about market volatility. I stood there, just behind Richard's shoulder. Close enough to hear everything. Far enough to be invisible. It was Claire who noticed me first. Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, assessing. Taking in the simple dress, the blank name tag, the age I no longer tried to hide. There was no recognition in her expression. Only a polite kind of dismissal. She turned back to Richard without a word. And that was when he finally saw me. For a fraction of a second, something crossed his face. Surprise. Then something else. Not guilt. Not warmth. Annoyance. Subtle, but unmistakable. Margaret, he said, his voice lower now. Controlled. I didn't realize you'd arrived. Didn't realize. As if I were a package delivered without notice. I came with you, I replied softly. A few of the others glanced between us, sensing something beneath the surface but not yet understanding it. Richard gave a small, tight smile. Yes, well, this is more of a business event. I didn't think you'd enjoy it. Claire's lips curved. Slightly, as if she agreed. I nodded. Of course. That made sense. After all, what would a woman like me, who had spent decades building a home, supporting a man, raising a family, possibly have to contribute in a room like this? I understand, I said. And I did. More than he realized. Because in that moment, standing there with a blank name tag on my chest and a stranger at my husband's side, I understood exactly who I had become in his world. Someone to be left off the list. Someone to be explained away. Someone to be hidden. So I smiled. Not for them. For myself. And I stepped back into the crowd, just as a voice from across the room cut cleanly through the noise. Margaret. I froze. Slowly, I turned. And every conversation in the room seemed to quiet, just a little, as the CEO himself began walking straight toward me. With purpose. With recognition. As if I were the only person he had been looking for all night. Margaret. The way he said my name, it didn't sound like a question. It sounded like recognition. Real recognition. Not the kind people fake at events like this, where they smile politely and pretend to remember you. No, this was different. His voice carried across the room with a certainty that made conversations soften, then shift, then pause altogether. I turned fully this time, and there he was, Daniel Whitaker, the CEO, the man whose name had been mentioned all evening in careful tones, like something both admired and feared. The kind of man people adjusted their posture for. The kind of man my husband had spent years trying to impress. And he was walking straight toward me. Not toward Richard. Not toward Claire. Toward me. You could feel it ripple through the room. Subtle, but unmistakable. Heads turned. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Even the soft jazz in the background seemed to fade, as if the air itself was waiting to see what would happen next. I didn't move. Not because I was frozen, but because something inside me had already gone very still. He stopped just a few steps away, his eyes fixed on mine. Not scanning. Not questioning. Certain. I was hoping you'd be here, he said. There was a warmth in his voice that didn't belong in rooms like this. Not at events built on performance and hierarchy. It felt personal. Behind me, I could sense Richard shifting. Mr. Whitaker, he said quickly, stepping forward, his tone snapping into that polished confidence again. Good to see you. I didn't realize you'd arrived, but Daniel didn't look at him. Not yet. Instead, his gaze stayed on me. And then, slowly, he smiled. Not wide. Not exaggerated. Just enough to carry memory. It's been a long time, Margaret. A long time. The words landed gently, but they carried weight. The kind of weight that made people listen more carefully, even if they didn't understand why. I inclined my head slightly. Yes, I said. It has. I could feel the eyes now. All of them. People who, just moments ago, had looked straight through me were now watching as if I had stepped into a spotlight I didn't ask for. Claire's hand slipped from Richard's arm. I noticed that. I notice things like that now. Daniel finally turned, just slightly, acknowledging the others around us. His presence shifted the energy of the group instantly. Where there had been casual laughter before, now there was attention. Carefulness. Richard, he said with a polite nod. Good evening. My husband straightened. Daniel, it's an honor. I was just, yes, Daniel said, gently, but in a way that ended the sentence before it could begin. Then his eyes moved back to me. I've been looking for you. There it was. The sentence. Simple, direct, and it changed everything. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that rearranged the room. I didn't react right away. That's something I've learned over the years. When something important is said, you don't rush to fill the silence. You let it settle. Let people sit with it. Have you? I asked softly. He nodded once. For quite some time, actually. Behind him, I could see a few of the executives exchanging glances. Quiet, curious. Trying to place me. Trying to understand why the man they all watched so closely was speaking to me like this. Richard laughed lightly, too lightly. Well, Margaret tends to keep a low profile, he said. She prefers staying out of the spotlight. There it was again. That subtle erasure. That careful rewriting. I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. Daniel did. And this time, the look he gave my husband was different. Measured. Is that so? He said. 3 words. But they carried a quiet edge. Richard shifted again. Yes, she's always been more comfortable behind the scenes. I could almost hear the unspoken part. Not important enough. Not relevant. Not worth mentioning. Daniel's gaze returned to me, softer now. That's not how I remember it. The room stilled. Not dramatically, but enough. Enough that even those pretending not to listen were listening. I felt something shift again. This time, not in the room, but inside me. Not anger. Not hurt. Something steadier. Something clearer. I imagine a lot has changed, I said. Daniel studied me for a moment, as if weighing that sentence, as if understanding what I hadn't said. Yes, he replied quietly. Some things have. A pause. Then he gestured slightly toward a quieter corner of the room. Would you walk with me for a moment? It wasn't a request people ignored. Not here. Not from him. I hesitated, just briefly. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I was aware of everything happening around us. Richard, standing there, caught between confusion and something sharper. Claire, watching closely now, her earlier confidence replaced by calculation. The others, trying to piece together a story they had clearly missed the beginning of. And me, standing in the middle of it all with a blank name tag on my chest. I reached up slowly and removed it. The small piece of plastic that had said nothing about who I was. I held it for a second, then set it down on the nearest table. I didn't need it anymore. I'd like that, I said. Daniel offered his arm, not out of show, but out of something that felt older than this room, older than this moment. I placed my hand lightly against it, and together, we walked. Not quickly, not dramatically, just deliberately. Behind us, I could feel the shift, the quiet unraveling of assumptions, the first cracks forming in the version of me that had been so easily dismissed. We stopped near a window overlooking the city lights. From here, the ballroom noise softened into something distant, almost irrelevant. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel turned slightly toward me. You disappeared, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was an observation. I didn't disappear, I replied calmly. I stepped back. He studied that answer. You always did know when to step away from things that no longer deserved you. A faint smile touched my lips. Not always, I said. Because if I had, I wouldn't have been standing in that ballroom tonight, wearing a dress chosen with care for a man who couldn't even put my name on a list. Daniel's expression softened. Well, he said quietly, I'm glad I found you again. Again, that word lingered. Because whatever this moment was, it wasn't random. And for the first time that evening, I realized something important. I hadn't been invisible. I had just been standing in the wrong place. And now, everything was about to change. You disappeared. His words from a moment ago didn't leave me. They stayed there, quiet, steady, like something waiting to be understood. We stood by the window, the city stretched out below us, lights blinking, cars moving, life continuing as if nothing inside that ballroom had just shifted. But it had. I could feel it. You always say things like that, I told him, my voice calm. As if people vanish instead of being pushed out. Daniel didn't answer right away. He didn't rush to correct me either. He just watched me. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. to be fully seen without interruption. You were never someone who could be pushed out, he said finally. I gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. That depends on who's doing the pushing. Silence again. Not uncomfortable, just honest. Behind us, the sound of the party carried on, muted now, like it belonged to another world. But I didn't have to turn around to know what was happening. I could feel it. The glances, the whispers, the shift. People were watching, trying to understand why the CEO of a company like this was standing in a quiet corner, speaking to a woman they hadn't even noticed 10 minutes ago. And more importantly, why he had been looking for her. I read your name on a document 3 years ago, Daniel said suddenly. That caught my attention. I turned slightly toward him. What document? A consulting proposal. It came across my desk during a merger review. He paused. Your analysis was attached. I frowned slightly. That can't be right. I haven't worked in years. That's what surprised me, he said. Because the insight, the structure, the way it anticipated long-term risk. He shook his head once, as if still impressed. It was better than anything my senior team produced. I felt something stir in my chest. Not pride. Not exactly. Recognition. Of something I had set aside, quietly, over time. I used to help Richard review things, I said. Back when we were building everything from the ground up. Before the titles. Before the board meetings. Daniel nodded. I remember. That made me look at him more closely. Remember? He met my gaze. You don't think I was always sitting at the top of the table, do you? A small pause. I used to be the one trying to get a seat in rooms like this, he continued. And I remember who made space, and who didn't. The words were simple, but they landed deeper than anything else he had said, because I knew what he meant. Not just in business. In life. I didn't do anything special, I said quietly. Yes, he replied. You did. He let that sit there, then added, softer. You treated people like they mattered before anyone else decided they did. I looked away for a moment, out at the city, because something about that felt too close, too real. I stopped, I said. It wasn't a confession, just a fact. Or maybe, he said, you were given fewer chances to continue. That was closer to the truth. Behind us, I heard footsteps. Measured. Hesitant. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. Margaret, Richard's voice said, careful now. Controlled in a different way than before. Polished, but strained. I didn't realize you and Daniel knew each other so well. There it was. The adjustment. The recalculation. I turned slowly. Richard stood a few feet away, Claire beside him again. But something had changed. Her posture was tighter. Her smile more cautious. The ease from earlier gone. Daniel didn't move away from me. He didn't create distance. If anything, he remained exactly where he was, which said more than words ever could. We've crossed paths, Daniel said calmly. Richard gave a short laugh. Well, that's unexpected. Yes, Daniel replied. It often is. A silence followed. Short, but heavy. Richard glanced at me, then back at Daniel. Margaret doesn't usually involve herself in business matters these days. There it was again. The quiet reduction. The careful framing. I watched him as he said it. Really watched him. And for the first time that night, I wasn't trying to understand him. I was seeing him clearly. She used to, Daniel said. Not loudly, not aggressively, but firmly enough that it couldn't be ignored. Richard's smile tightened. That was a long time ago. Was it? Daniel asked. Another pause. Claire shifted beside him. I think what Richard means is, I know what he means, Daniel said, gently, but in a way that stopped her. Then he looked at me. Do you? It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. And for a moment, I considered staying silent. That would have been the version of me from before. The one who smoothed things over. The one who let moments pass. The one who chose peace, even when it cost something. But something had changed. Not because of Daniel. Not because of the room. Because of what I had seen clearly for the first time. Yes, I said. My voice was quiet, but steady. I do. Richard held my gaze. And in his eyes, I saw it. Not authority. Not certainty. Something else. Uncertainty. Just for a second. But it was there. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. I think, I continued, just as calmly, there are a lot of things we haven't talked about in a very long time. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be, because the meaning underneath them was. The air shifted again. Subtle, but undeniable. Claire looked between us, her expression calculating again, but this time, less confident. Daniel remained still, observing, not interfering. And that told me something important. This part was mine. Richard cleared his throat. Margaret, this isn't really the time or place. No, I said, softly, and I shook my head once. Not dramatically, just enough. You're right. I let a small pause settle, then added, it isn't. I wasn't going to argue. Not here. Not like this. Because something inside me had already moved past that. I turned slightly back toward the window, then back to Daniel. Thank you, I said, for remembering. He held my gaze. For not forgetting, he replied. A quiet exchange, but it carried more weight than anything else said that night. And in that moment, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about proving anything to the room, or correcting Richard, or reclaiming some version of myself he had tried to diminish. This was about something simpler, something stronger, knowing exactly who I was, without needing anyone else to confirm it. And as I stood there, with the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass, and the room behind me slowly adjusting to a reality it hadn't expected, I realized this was only the beginning, not of a confrontation, but of a shift. And once something shifts like that, it doesn't go back. I didn't go back to the center of the room after that. I didn't need to. The music continued. Glasses clinked. Conversations slowly picked back up, but not the same way as before. There was a different rhythm now, a hesitation, a quiet awareness that something had shifted, even if no one could quite explain it. I stood near the window a moment longer. Then I moved. Not toward Richard, not toward Claire, just away. That's something you learn with time. You don't always have to confront people to change the outcome. Sometimes, the strongest move is simply choosing where you stand. I walked past a group of women discussing travel plans. Paris, Aspen, Napa Valley. Their voices were light, effortless. One of them glanced at me briefly, then did a double take. Recognition, or maybe curiosity. It didn't matter. I kept walking, because as I moved through that room, something else began to surface. Not from the present, from the past. Memories don't come back all at once. They arrive in pieces. Small things first. The way Richard used to look at me when we were younger. Not impressed. Not evaluating. Grateful. We didn't have much back then. A small house just outside the city. One car. A kitchen table that doubled as his workspace. I used to sit across from him at night, long after dinner, reviewing documents he didn't fully understand yet. Contracts. Proposals. Numbers that didn't quite add up. You see things differently, he once told me. I remember that. Because he said it like it mattered. And back then, it did. I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the mirrored columns. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Not because she was older, but because she looked quieter. Not weak, just quieter. And I realized something. That didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly. Over years. Little moments. Easy to dismiss at the time. Harder to ignore now. I remembered the first event Richard asked me not to attend. It's just business, he had said. You'd be bored. I believed him. I stayed home. Then another. This one's more formal. Very corporate. I smiled. Said I understood. And I did. At least, I thought I did. Then came the introductions. Or rather, the lack of them. At dinners, he would say my name less. At meetings, not at all. At some point, I stopped expecting it. That's the thing about being slowly moved out of your own place in someone's life. You don't notice the exact moment it happens. You just wake up one day and realize you're standing on the outside. Looking in, I picked up a glass of water from a passing tray. Not champagne. Not tonight. My hand was steady. That mattered to me. Across the room, I saw Richard again. He was speaking with two men now. Focused. Composed. But every few seconds, his eyes shifted. Searching. For me. That was new. I took a small sip of water. And for the first time that evening, I didn't feel like I needed to go to him. Not to fix anything. Not to smooth anything over. Not to make things easier. I let him look. I let him wonder. And I stayed where I was. Claire stood beside him again, but she wasn't leaning in the same way as before. Her posture had changed. Subtle, but noticeable. She wasn't as certain anymore. People like her notice shifts quickly. They have to. That's how they stay where they are. A soft voice interrupted my thoughts. Margaret. I turned. Daniel had joined me again, though I hadn't seen him approach. You left them, he said. It wasn't judgment. Just observation. I stepped away. I corrected gently. A small difference, but an important one. He nodded. I remember when you used to do that during negotiations. I raised an eyebrow slightly. Do what? Let people think they were in control until they weren't. A faint smile touched my lips. That was a long time ago. Yes, he said, but it doesn't look like you forgot how. I looked down at my glass for a moment, then back at him. It's not about control, I said. It's about clarity. He considered that, then nodded again. That sounds like you. We stood there quietly. No rush. No pressure. Just space. And in that space, something settled. Not anger. Not regret. Understanding. Clearer than it had been in years. I used to think loyalty meant staying, I said after a while. Daniel didn't interrupt. I thought it meant being patient. Supportive. Giving things time to improve. I paused, even when something felt off. And now, he asked. I met his eyes. Now I think loyalty should go both ways. Simple. But it took me a long time to understand it that clearly. Across the room, Richard finally excused himself from the group he was with. I saw it happen. The quick apology. The polite nod. The controlled urgency. And then he started walking toward us. Not fast, but direct. I watched him approach. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel the need to prepare what I was going to say. I didn't rehearse. I didn't soften anything in advance. I just stood there, as myself. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak quietly, far enough that it didn't draw attention. Margaret, he said again. My name. Carefully now. Different than before. We should talk. I tilted my head slightly. About what? He hesitated. Just for a second. But I saw it. And once you see hesitation in someone who used to feel certain, it changes how you listen to them. This situation, he said. It's being misunderstood. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because it was familiar. That phrasing. That careful shift of responsibility. It looks exactly how it is, I replied calmly. He glanced briefly at Daniel. Then back at me. This isn't the place for this conversation. No, I said softly. It isn't. Another pause. Then I added. But neither was tonight. That landed. I could see it. Not loudly, but clearly. For a moment, Richard didn't respond. And in that silence, something else became clear to me. This wasn't just about being left off a guest list, or not being introduced, or even the woman standing beside him earlier. It was about something deeper, something that had been building quietly for years. And now, it was no longer quiet. I set my glass down on the table beside me. Don't worry, I said. My voice was steady. I'm not going to make a scene. I paused, then finished. I don't need to. And as I looked at him, I realized something I hadn't fully accepted until that moment. I wasn't the one being pushed out anymore. He was the one losing ground. And he knew it. There's a particular kind of silence that happens when something breaks, but no one wants to admit it. That's what settled between us. Right there in the middle of that ballroom. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just undeniable. Richard looked at me like he was trying to find the version of me he understood. The one who would soften. The one who would nod. The one who would quietly step aside so things could continue the way he preferred. But that version wasn't standing there anymore. You're overthinking this, he said finally, lowering his voice just enough to sound reasonable. It was just a guest list error. I held his gaze. For a moment. Then another. No, I said. One word. Calm. Clear. It wasn't. He exhaled slightly, like he was trying to keep control of the situation. Margaret, please. Not here. Again. That phrase. Not here. Not now. Later. Always later. I used to accept that. I used to wait. I don't anymore. Then where? I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Because there wasn't an answer. Not one that would hold up under the truth of what had just happened. Behind him, I could see Claire watching. Not pretending not to listen anymore. Fully aware. Fully engaged. Her expression wasn't smug this time. It was cautious. Because something had shifted beyond her control. I didn't think you'd want to be part of this, Richard said, adjusting his tone again. Softer now. More careful. It's business. High level. You've never been interested in this side of things. There it was. The rewriting. The quiet erasure. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Something steadier than that. Truth. I used to sit across from you at a kitchen table until midnight, I said. Reviewing every contract you didn't understand yet. He blinked. Just once. But it was enough. I used to catch the risks you missed, I continued. The clauses you overlooked. The numbers that didn't add up. My voice never rose. It didn't need to. I used to be the reason you walked into rooms like this with confidence. A pause. The kind that stretches. Because everyone standing close enough now was listening. Not openly, but closely. Richard shifted his weight. That was different, he said. That was early on. Things have changed. Yes, I said. They have. I let that sit for a second. Then added, you stopped needing me. Another pause. Longer this time. Because that wasn't entirely true. And he knew it. I didn't say that, he replied. No, I said softly. You didn't. And that was the point. Claire stepped forward slightly, her voice smooth but edged with something tighter now. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said. Richard was just trying to keep things streamlined tonight. These events can be overwhelming. I'm not overwhelmed, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at her for long. Just enough. And then I looked back at Richard. Because this wasn't her place to explain. It never was. Another silence. Short. Sharp. Daniel hadn't moved. He was still there. Not intervening. Not rescuing. Just witnessing. And that mattered. More than anything he could have said. Richard cleared his throat. Margaret, we can discuss this at home. Home. The word felt different now. He noticed that. I could see it. Because for the first time, I didn't immediately agree. I didn't nod. I didn't say yes. I'm not sure that conversation belongs there anymore, I said. His expression tightened. Just slightly. What does that mean? I took a breath. Not to steady myself. To choose my words carefully. It means, I said, this didn't start tonight. His eyes flickered. He knew that. I just chose to see it tonight. That landed. Not loudly, but clearly. Claire looked between us again. Less confident now. Less certain of where she stood. Because this wasn't something she could navigate. This wasn't about positioning. This was history. Years of it. And it was finally being spoken, even if only in pieces. You're making this into something bigger than it is, Richard said. There it was. The last attempt. Minimize. Contain. Control. I almost smiled. Not out of amusement. Out of recognition. No, I said. I'm seeing it for exactly what it is. Another pause. Then I added, quieter. For the first time. The music swelled slightly behind us. A new song. A shift in tempo. But here, everything felt still. Richard looked at me like he was trying to find a way back. Back to the version of this conversation he could manage. Back to the version of me he could predict. But that path was gone. I didn't mean to embarrass you, he said. And for a moment, that was the closest thing to honesty I had heard all night. I know, I replied. That surprised him. I believe you didn't mean to. I held his gaze. Then finished. You just didn't think about me at all. That was it. That was the moment. Not loud. Not explosive. But final in a way that didn't need volume. Because there are truths that don't need to be shouted to be undeniable. He didn't respond. Because there wasn't anything left to say. And in that silence, something shifted again. Not in the room. In me. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for explanations. Not for apologies. Not for things to go back to the way they were. Because I finally understood something simple. They weren't going to go back. And more importantly, I didn't want them to. I reached for my purse. A small movement, but deliberate. Richard noticed. Where are you going? He asked. I looked at him. Calm. Clear. Somewhere I'm actually expected. I didn't need to explain further. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to make a scene. Because the scene had already happened. Quietly. In front of everyone who mattered. And as I turned, I felt it. The shift. Not just in how others saw me, but in how I saw myself. And once that changes, everything else follows. I didn't rush out of the ballroom. That would have made it look like I was leaving because I had been hurt. And I wasn't going to give that version of the story to anyone. So I walked. Slowly. Measured. The same way I had walked in. The same way I used to walk beside Richard when we entered rooms together. Back when I was introduced, not omitted. I could feel it now. Eyes following me. Not all of them. But enough. Because people notice when something changes, even if they don't understand what changed. I passed the check-in table again. The young woman looked up. This time, her expression was different. Not rehearsed. Not automatic. Careful. Ma'am, she started. Then stopped. Because she didn't know what to say. I understood that. It's all right, I told her gently. And I meant it. Because this had never been about her. I reached up and removed the blank badge completely. The one with no name. No identity. No place. I set it down on the table in front of her. I won't be needing this, I said. She nodded quickly, almost relieved. I turned. And just as I reached the edge of the ballroom, Margaret, Daniel's voice again. Steady. Certain. I paused. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. Then I turned back. He was walking toward me again. But this time, there was no distance between us. No crowd. No interruption. Just clarity. You're leaving, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. A small pause. Then I added, for tonight. He studied my face. Not searching. Understanding. Good, he said. That caught me slightly off guard. Good. I repeated. He nodded once. Because you don't belong in rooms where you have to explain your presence. The words were simple, but they landed deeper than anything else that had been said all evening. I held his gaze, and for a moment, I let myself feel it. Not the hurt, not the disappointment. Something else. Validation. Not from him. From myself. I think I knew that. I said quietly. I just needed to see it clearly. Daniel gave a small, almost approving nod. That's how it works, he said. Clarity rarely arrives when it's convenient. A faint smile touched my lips. No, I said. It doesn't. We stood there for a second. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a card. Not flashy, not exaggerated, just clean, direct. He held it out to me. If you're open to it, he said, I'd like to continue this conversation. I glanced down at the card. His name, his direct line, nothing else. No titles, no unnecessary details, just access. I didn't take it immediately, not out of hesitation, out of awareness, because I understood what this moment was. Not an opportunity, a shift, a door opening, after a long time of standing in places where doors quietly closed. Why? I asked, not defensively, just honestly. He didn't answer right away. He considered the question, then said, because people like you don't disappear. A pause. They get overlooked. Another pause. And that's usually someone else's mistake. I looked at the card again, then back at him. And you don't like mistakes? I asked. A slight smile. Not ones I can correct. That was clear enough. I reached out, took the card. Simple, decisive, no hesitation. Because this wasn't about proving anything to Richard, or fixing what had just happened. This was about something else entirely. Something forward. All right, I said. Daniel nodded once, then stepped back. Not lingering, not pressing, just allowing. I appreciated that, more than he probably realized. Because control, real control, doesn't force. It gives space. I slipped the card into my purse, then turned again toward the exit. This time, no one called me back. No one tried to stop me. And that told me everything I needed to know. As I stepped outside, the night air felt different. Cool, clear, honest. The noise of the ballroom faded behind me as the doors closed. And for the first time that evening, I exhaled. Fully. Not sharply. Not dramatically. Just completely. I stood there for a moment. On the steps. Looking out at the city. Cars passing. Lights shifting. Life continuing. Exactly as it had before. But I wasn't the same. That's the thing about moments like that. From the outside, nothing changes. From the inside, everything does. I thought about Richard. Still inside. Trying to regain control of a room that had already moved past him. Trying to explain something that couldn't be explained away. Trying to hold on to a version of me that no longer existed. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to go back in and help him do that. I didn't feel responsible. I didn't feel obligated. I just felt done. Not angry. Not bitter. Done. I walked down the steps slowly. One step at a time. Each one steady. Each one certain. And somewhere between the top of those stairs and the sidewalk below, I realized something simple. I hadn't lost anything tonight. I had seen something. Clearly. Finally. And once you see something that clearly, you don't go back to pretending you didn't. I reached the bottom step. Paused. Then took out Daniel's card again. Looked at it. Just for a second. Then slipped it back into my purse. Not as a lifeline. Not as a rescue. But as a reminder that I still had a place in rooms like that. Just not the ones where I had to shrink to fit. And as I walked away from the hotel, I didn't look back. Because I didn't need to. I already knew. That chapter had closed the moment I stepped out. The drive home was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels empty. The kind that feels full. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even check my phone. I just drove. Streetlights passed one by one, casting brief shadows across the windshield. The city slowly shifted from bright and crowded to still and familiar. And in that silence, everything I had pushed aside for years started lining up. Clearly, I pulled into the driveway and turned off the engine. For a moment, I just sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, breathing. Not deeply, just steadily. This house. I had lived in it for over 30 years. Every corner held something. A memory. A decision. A compromise. I stepped inside. The air felt different. Not because anything had changed physically. Because I had. I set my purse down on the hallway table. The same table where I used to. Leave notes for Richard. Dinner's ready. Don't forget your meeting. Call me when you land. Small things. Quiet things. Things that used to feel like care. Now they felt like evidence of how much space I had been holding. Alone. I walked into the kitchen. Everything was exactly where I left it. Clean. Organized. Predictable. For years, I thought stability looked like this. Now I realized. It also looked like silence. The kind that hides things. I poured myself a glass of water. Took a sip. Set it down. And that's when I saw it. On the counter. An envelope. My name on it. Margaret Collins. In Richard's handwriting. I stared at it for a second. Then picked it up. It wasn't sealed. That told me something. I opened it. Inside, a single sheet of paper. Typed. Formal. Precise. I read it once. Then again. Slower. It wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Because every word was intentional. A notice. Not emotional. Not angry. Not even apologetic. Just structured. Clear. A proposal to restructure certain assets. Properties. Accounts. Investments. All framed in neutral language. Efficient. Clean. And buried in the middle of it. A line that stood out. Primary decision-making authority will be reassigned to ensure operational efficiency moving forward. I let that sentence sit. Because I understood it. Not as legal language. As intention. This hadn't started tonight. This had been planned. Quietly. Carefully. While I was still setting tables and making space. I set the paper down. Flat against the counter. My hand rested on it for a moment. Not trembling. Not tense. Just there. Then I nodded. Once. To myself. Because something finally clicked into place. Not painfully. Clearly. I walked out of the kitchen. Down the hallway. Into the study. Richard's study. The one room in the house that had slowly become his. Over the years, my things had disappeared from here. A book I used to keep on the shelf. A chair I used to sit in. Even the lamp I picked out once. Replaced. Adjusted. Refined. I opened the drawer of his desk. No hesitation. No second guessing. Inside, everything was organized. Files. Folders. Documents. Labeled. Controlled. And there it was. Another folder. My name. Margaret. I pulled it out. Opened it. More documents. More language. More decisions. Made. Without me. I didn't rush. I read. Carefully. Page by page. And the more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't about a guest list. This wasn't about a party. This wasn't even about Claire. This was about removal. Systematic. Quiet. Legal. And complete. I closed the folder. Placed it back exactly where I found it. Because I wasn't here to disrupt anything. Not yet. I turned off the light. Walked back into the hallway. And that's when I heard it. The front door opening. Richard. He stepped inside. Stopped when he saw me. There was a pause. Not long. But enough. You left early, he said. His voice was normal. Controlled. Like nothing had happened. I looked at him. Really looked. For the first time that night. Without trying to understand him. Without trying to meet him halfway. Just seeing him. Yes, I said. A small silence followed. He set his keys down. Took off his jacket. Routine. Familiar. I didn't expect you to come home so quickly, he added. I almost smiled. Not out of humor. Out of recognition. You didn't expect a lot of things tonight, I said. That landed. He glanced at me. Carefully. What's that supposed to mean? I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked past him. Into the living room. He followed. Of course he did. Because for the first time, he didn't know where this conversation was going. And that made him uncomfortable. Margaret, he said, sharper now. If this is about the party, it's not, I said. And I turned to face him. Fully. It's about this. I reached into my purse. Pulled out the folded document. The one from the kitchen. Held it up. His eyes dropped to it. Just for a second. But I saw it. Recognition. Then calculation. Then control. It's a draft, he said quickly. Nothing finalized. Of course. That was the answer. Prepared. Ready. I nodded slowly. I know, I said. My voice stayed calm. Even. That's why it's still in the house. He frowned slightly. What are you implying? I held his gaze. I'm not implying anything, I said. I'm understanding. A pause. Then I added, for the first time. The room felt different now. Not tense. Not loud. Just honest. And honesty has a way of making people uncomfortable when they're not ready for it. Richard exhaled, ran a hand through his hair. This isn't what you think, he said. I believed him. Not because he was right. Because he didn't fully understand it himself. It's exactly what I think, I replied. And I set the paper down on the table between us. Flat. Clear. No movement. No drama. Just there. And in that moment, something shifted again. Not outside. Not in the room. In him. Because for the first time, he realized something. I wasn't reacting. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't confused. I wasn't asking. I was aware. And that changes everything. He looked at me. Really looked. And I could see it. The realization. Quiet. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. You went through my files, he said. I shook my head once. No, I replied. I finally looked. And that was the difference. Because once you start looking clearly, you can't go back to not seeing. And standing there, in the house I had helped build, with the man I had stood beside for decades, I understood something with complete certainty. This wasn't the beginning of a problem. This was the moment. It finally surfaced. He said, this isn't what you think. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't try to understand what he meant. I didn't try to soften it. I didn't try to meet him halfway. I just looked at him. Calm. Still. Clear. It is, I said. Not louder. Not sharper. Just certain. That kind of certainty does something to people. It takes away their ability to redirect the conversation, to reshape it, to control it. Richard stared at me for a moment, like he was trying to find the right version of this situation to step into. The one where he explained. The one where I listened. The one where things went back to normal. But normal had already left the room. You're taking this out of context, he said finally. Context. Another familiar word. I used to accept that too. I don't anymore. Then give me the context, I replied. A pause. Longer this time. Because there wasn't a better version of what I had already seen. He walked past me, slowly, into the kitchen, picked up the glass I had left on the counter, took a sip. Small movements. Buying time. I followed. Not closely. Not aggressively. Just present. You've always handled the home, he said, setting the glass down. I've handled the business. That's how it's always worked. I leaned lightly against the doorway. That's how you rewrote it, I said. He turned. Slightly. Not fully. That's how it became. No, I said. That's how it was made. Another pause. Then I added, quietly. That landed. Because it was true. It hadn't been one decision. It had been many. Small ones. Convenient ones. The kind you don't question until you step back and see the pattern. This is about structure, he said. Protection. Efficiency. You don't need to be involved in all of this. There it was again. You don't need to. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because I finally understood it. That's interesting, I said. He frowned slightly. What is? You've been deciding what I need without asking me. I let that sit. Then added, for years. He opened his mouth to respond. Stopped. Closed it again. Because there wasn't a clean way to argue that. Not anymore. This isn't about you being excluded, he said. It's about making things simpler moving forward. Simpler. For who? I didn't ask it out loud. I didn't need to. The answer was already there. I walked into the kitchen fully now. Not standing at the edge. Not observing. Present. Centered. You moved my name off a guest list tonight, I said. He exhaled slightly. Margaret. And you moved my name out of decisions long before that. My voice stayed even. Measured. That didn't happen all at once. I met his eyes. It happened piece by piece. Another silence. This one heavier. Because now, we were no longer talking about a document. Or a party. We were talking about something neither of us could pretend not to see. You never said anything, he replied. And there it was. The final defense. Silence equals agreement. I nodded. Yes, I said. I didn't. A small pause. Then I added. I thought I was being supportive. His expression shifted. Just slightly. That's what partnership is, he said. No, I replied. That's what I thought it was. I let that sit. Then continued. Partnership is being included, not managed. The word hung there. Managed. He didn't like that. I could see it. That's not fair, he said. Fair. Another word people reach for when they feel something slipping. I'm not measuring fairness, I said. I'm looking at reality. And reality was right there on the counter. In the folder. In the way he had introduced someone else tonight. In the way he had spoken around me, instead of to me. I reached for the document again, lifted it slightly, not aggressively, just enough. You reassigned authority, I said. His jaw tightened. It's temporary. Temporary decisions don't get written like this. I tapped the page once. Lightly. You didn't think I'd read it. That wasn't a question. It was a fact. He didn't answer, because he couldn't deny it. I've been in this house long enough to recognize your patterns, I continued. Quiet. Steady. When you finalize something, it's already been decided. Another pause. Then I added, this was decided before tonight. He looked away, just briefly, but that was enough. Because sometimes, what people don't say confirms more than what they do. I was going to talk to you, he said. I believed him. In his version of time. His version of control. His version of when things should be explained. But that version no longer worked for me. When I asked, he didn't answer. Because there wasn't a moment. Not one that wasn't already too late. I nodded once. Exactly. The word was quiet. But final. I set the document back down. Carefully. Flat. No wrinkles. No disruption. Just clarity. That's the difference between us, I said. He looked at me again. More directly this time. What difference? I met his gaze. You plan outcomes, I said. I accept realities. A pause. Then I finished. And tonight, those two finally met. The room felt still again. Not tense. Not loud. Just undeniable. Richard leaned against the counter. Arms crossed now. Defensive. Calculated. You're making a bigger issue out of this than necessary, he said. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence do its work. Then I said, no, one word. Again. Clear. This is just the first time you're hearing it. And that was the truth. Because nothing I said tonight was new. It had all been there. Under the surface. Waiting. Until I chose to see it. And once I did, there was no going back to the version of me who didn't. Richard said, you're making this a bigger issue than necessary. And for a moment, I almost recognized that tone again. The one he used in meetings. The one that gently minimized problems until they felt manageable. Until they felt dismissible. But something had changed. Not in him. In me. No, I said. I didn't move. I didn't raise my voice. This is just the first time you're hearing it. The room went quiet again. Not because of what I said. Because of how I said it. There's a difference. When someone reacts, you can respond. When someone is calm, you have nowhere to go. Richard shifted slightly, uncrossing his arms. That was new. He rarely did that. It meant he was adjusting. Recalculating. Margaret, he said, more carefully now, we've built a life together. You can't just reinterpret everything because of one evening. One evening. I almost smiled. Not out of humor. Out of clarity. This isn't one evening, I said. I took a step closer to the table. Not confrontational. Just present. It's the first evening I didn't ignore what I've been seeing for years. He didn't respond immediately. Because there wasn't a quick way around that. You're focusing on the wrong things, he said. Another familiar move. Redirect. Reframe. Reduce. I shook my head once. I'm focusing on exactly the right things, I replied. My hand rested lightly on the edge of the table. Grounded. Steady. You removed me from decisions. I tapped the document gently. You removed me from representation. A small pause. Tonight just made it visible. He exhaled slowly. I could see it now. The tension. Not loud, but present. This was never about removing you, he said. It was about moving forward efficiently. Efficient. I let that word sit. Then I nodded. That's the word you chose, I said. A pause. Then I added, not me. He frowned slightly. What does that mean? I met his eyes. It means you organized your life in a way where I no longer fit into it. The sentence was simple, but it carried weight. Because it wasn't emotional. It was structural. And he understood structure. That's why it landed. That's not true, he said quickly. But this time, there was something behind it. Not certainty. Something closer to defense. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just let the silence hold the statement. Because sometimes, truth doesn't need reinforcement. It just needs space. You still live here, he added. That one almost sounded like proof. Like evidence. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. I live here. A small pause. Do I still belong here? That stopped him. Completely. Because that question wasn't about paperwork. It wasn't about assets. It wasn't even about the party. It was about something deeper. And there was no quick answer for that. I don't know what you want me to say, he admitted. And that was the first honest thing he had said in a while. I'm not asking you to say anything, I replied. I'm asking you to see it. Another pause. Longer now. Because seeing something requires accepting it. And that takes time. Richard walked a few steps away. Then back again. Movement. Restlessness. That was new too. You're acting like I've done something intentional, he said. I watched him carefully. You did, I said. He shook his head. No, I didn't. I tilted my head slightly. You made decisions, I said. You just didn't consider me when you made them. That's the difference. Intent isn't always about what you plan. Sometimes it's about what you leave out. He stopped moving, stood still, and for a moment, I saw it, clearer than before. He wasn't just defending his actions. He was trying to understand them himself. This is how things evolve, he said. I nodded. Yes. Another pause. Exactly. I let that word settle. Then continued. They evolved away from me. The room felt heavier now. Not tense. Just undeniable. Because we had moved past explanations into recognition. And once you reach that point, there's no simple way back. You could have said something, he repeated. Softer this time. Almost like he needed that to be true. I nodded. I could have. A pause. Then I added, but I thought you would notice. That one landed differently. Because it wasn't an accusation. It was something else. Disappointment. Quiet. Measured. Real. He looked at me. And for the first time that night, he didn't have a response ready. He just stood there, processing. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't about winning an argument. This wasn't about proving him wrong. This was about something much simpler. I had stopped protecting the version of our life that only worked for him. And once that protection is gone, everything becomes visible. I'm not trying to make this difficult, I said. My voice softened slightly. Not weak. Just clear. I'm trying to make it honest. Another silence. Then I stepped back. Just slightly. Not retreating. Creating space. Because this part wasn't about pushing further. It was about letting what had been said settle. Richard ran a hand over his face. Slower this time. Less controlled. More real. I didn't think it mattered this much to you, he said. There it was. The final piece. Not cruel. Not intentional. Just unaware. I nodded once. That's the problem, I said. A pause. Then I finished. You stopped asking. And that was the truth. Simple. Complete. Unavoidable. Because relationships don't usually break in one moment. They shift. Quietly. Over time. Until one day, you finally see where you've been standing. And realize you've been standing there alone. You stopped asking. After I said it, I didn't take it back. I didn't soften it. I didn't explain it further. Because there was nothing left to explain. Richard stood there, looking at me like he was trying to find a version of this conversation he could step into. One that didn't feel like it was slipping out of his control. But this wasn't that kind of conversation anymore. This wasn't something he could manage. I've been under pressure, he said after a moment. A new angle. A different approach. The company's expanding. There are responsibilities you don't see. I've always seen them, I said quietly. I didn't interrupt him sharply. I didn't cut him off. I just corrected the direction. He paused. Because he knew that was true. I just stopped being included in them. That landed differently. Not like an accusation. Like a fact. He exhaled slowly. You chose not to be involved, he said. I almost smiled again. That word. Chose. It sounded clean. Simple. But it wasn't accurate. I chose to support you, I replied. A small pause. You chose to stop including me. The difference between those two things was everything. He looked away. Just briefly. But long enough. Because somewhere in that space, he understood it. Not fully. Not comfortably. But enough. This isn't about blame, I said. My tone shifted slightly. Softer. Not weaker. Just clearer. It's about where things are now. That mattered. Because I wasn't trying to pull him backward. I wasn't trying to fix the past. I was looking at what was standing right in front of us. And it didn't match what we used to be. Richard leaned against the counter again. But differently this time. Less controlled. More uncertain. What do you want? He asked. There it was. The question people ask when they realize something has changed, but they don't know how to adjust to it. I didn't answer immediately. Because for years, I would have answered quickly. To keep things smooth. To keep things stable. To keep things from becoming uncomfortable. But I wasn't doing that anymore. So I took a breath. Not to steady myself. To give the question the space it deserved. I want clarity, I said. Simple. Direct. He frowned slightly. Clarity about what? I met his eyes. About where I stand. A pause. Then I added, in your life. The room felt different again. Not tense. Not loud. Just focused. Because that question couldn't be answered with a document or a business explanation. It required something else. Something he hadn't been offering. He hesitated. Again, that hesitation told me more than any answer could. You're my wife, he said finally. The words were correct. Technically. But they felt incomplete. I nodded slowly. Yes, I said. I am. A small pause. Then I asked, what does that mean to you now? That stopped him. Completely. Because it wasn't a label anymore. It was a definition. And definitions require honesty. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked away. Then back at me. And in that moment, I saw it clearly. He hadn't thought about it. Not in a long time. Not beyond the structure. Not beyond the role. And that was the answer. I didn't need him to say it. I could see it. I think, I said gently. You got used to me being there. A pause. Without needing to define what that meant. He didn't argue. He didn't correct me. Because he couldn't. That's not how I see it, he said. But his voice didn't carry the same certainty anymore. I nodded. I understand, I said. And I did. Because I had been part of that version too. The version where things just continued. Without being questioned. Without being redefined. Until one day, they no longer made sense. I'm not trying to take anything away from you, I continued. I'm just not willing to stay in a place where I don't know what I am anymore. That was the truth. Simple. Clear. And it didn't require emotion to be powerful. It just required honesty. Richard ran his hand along the counter. Slowly. Like he was grounding himself. This doesn't have to change everything, he said. There it was. The attempt to contain it again. To keep things within a manageable frame. I shook my head slightly. It already has, I replied. A pause. Then I added, you just haven't caught up to it yet. That was the difference between us now. I had seen it. Accepted it. He was still trying to keep it from fully forming. I can adjust things, he said. Bring you back into discussions. Rework the structure. No, I said. Gently, but firmly. I'm not something you reinsert into a system. That mattered. Because this wasn't about access. It wasn't about meetings. It wasn't about documents. It was about something deeper. Something that couldn't be fixed with adjustments. It's not about being included again, I said. It's about understanding why I was removed in the first place. Silence. He didn't have an answer for that. Not a real one. Not one that didn't lead back to the same truth. That he had stopped seeing me as part of that space. And once that happens, you can't just reverse it. Not without acknowledging it. I didn't think you saw it that way, he said. There it was again. That quiet realization. Not cruel. Not intentional. Just unaware. I nodded. I didn't either, I said. A small pause. Until tonight. And that was the turning point. Not the party. Not the CEO. Not the document. The moment I stopped explaining things away and started seeing them clearly. I stepped back slightly, creating space again. Not distance. Just clarity. We don't have to solve this tonight, I said. My voice softened. Not because I was unsure. Because I was done forcing anything. But we do have to stop pretending it's not there. That was the line. The one that mattered. Because from this point forward, there was no going back to the version of us that avoided this. Not for me. And standing there, in the quiet of that house, with everything finally out in the open, I realized something simple. This wasn't the moment everything fell apart. This was the moment. It finally became honest. We don't have to solve this tonight. After I said it, I meant it. Not as a pause. Not as a delay. As a boundary. And that was new. Richard looked at me, still trying to place where this conversation had shifted beyond his control. Because for years, I would have stayed. Sat down. Talked it through until it softened. Until it became manageable again. But this wasn't something I was going to manage. Not anymore. You're just going to walk away from this? He asked. There was something different in his voice now. Not authority. Not certainty. Something closer to unease. I shook my head slightly. I'm not walking away, I said. I'm stepping out of something that doesn't make sense anymore. That was the truth. Simple. Clear. And it didn't require anything more. He took a step forward. Margaret, we can fix this. Fix. Another word that sounded good, but didn't quite fit. I looked at him carefully. This isn't something you fix, I replied. A small pause. It's something you understand. He frowned. And what if I do understand it? I held his gaze. Then things change. That was the part he hadn't fully accepted yet. Change doesn't negotiate. It doesn't adjust itself to comfort. It just happens. And then you decide what to do with it. Richard ran, his hand along the back of a chair. Slowly, thinking, trying to find ground. You're making it sound like everything is already decided, he said. I nodded. Not everything, I replied. But enough. A quiet silence settled between us again. Not tense. Not loud. Just final in a way that didn't need to be announced. Because once something becomes clear, it doesn't need to be repeated. I can bring you back into everything, he said again. Meetings. Decisions. Authority. All the things he thought mattered. I shook my head. That's not what I'm asking for. He looked at me, frustration starting to surface. Then what is? I didn't answer right away. Because the answer wasn't complicated. It just required him to see something he had avoided for a long time. I'm asking you to recognize that I was already removed, I said. A pause. Before tonight. That was the line. The one that mattered. Because it wasn't about the future. It was about the truth of the past. And once that truth is acknowledged, everything else follows. He didn't respond immediately, because he couldn't argue with it. Not honestly. I didn't think of it that way, he said finally. And again, that wasn't cruelty. It was absence. Awareness that never happened. I nodded once. I know. A small pause. That's why we're here. The room felt quieter than before. Not empty. Just settled. Because the conversation had reached a place where there wasn't anything left to defend. Only things to accept. I don't want to lose this, he said. And for the first time that night, that sounded real. Not strategic. Not controlled. Just real. I looked at him. And I believed him. But belief isn't the same as agreement. You already did, I said. Not harsh. Not cold. Just honest. That landed. I could see it. Because sometimes the truth doesn't come with anger. It comes with clarity. And that's harder to argue with. He looked at me like he was trying to measure the distance between us. And for the first time, he could see it. Not as a feeling. As reality. What are you saying? He asked quietly. I took a breath. Not to steady myself. Just to speak clearly. I'm saying I'm not going to stay in something that only works when I stay quiet. There it was. The full truth. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just complete. A long silence followed. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. Because both people already know what it means. Richard looked away. Then back at me. Then away again. Like he was trying to find a version of this that didn't end here. But it didn't exist. Not anymore. So what happens now? He asked. I thought about that. Not for long. Because I already knew. I take time, I said. A pause. To decide what this looks like for me. That was important. For me. Not for us. Not yet. Just me. He nodded slowly. Not agreeing. Not understanding completely. But recognizing that he didn't control that answer anymore. And that was new. I didn't expect this, he said. I almost smiled. I know. A small pause. Neither did I. And that was the truth. Because no one expects the moment they stop accepting things they once tolerated. It just happens. Quietly. Clearly. And once it does, you don't go back. I walked past him. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just forward. Toward the hallway. Toward the space that still felt like mine. At least for now. He didn't stop me. He didn't call after me. Because something in him understood. This wasn't something he could interrupt. And as I reached the end of the hallway, I paused. Just for a second. Not to turn back. Just to feel it. The shift. The clarity. The quiet certainty that had settled in me. Then I continued walking. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for him to catch up. I was already moving forward. The house was quiet that night. Not tense. Not heavy. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask anything from you. I closed the bedroom door behind me and stood there for a moment. Still. Listening. Not for footsteps. Not for Richard's voice. Just for myself. Because for years, I had gotten used to filling silence. Making sure things stayed smooth. Making sure nothing felt uncomfortable for too long. But this silence didn't need to be fixed. I walked to the dresser slowly. My reflection met me in the mirror. The same face. The same silver hair. The same woman who had walked into that ballroom. Earlier that evening hoping, quietly, that she still belonged beside her husband. But something was different. Not on the surface. Deeper than that. I looked certain, not of what would happen next, but of what I would no longer accept. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The same bed we had shared for decades. and I let the day replay itself. The blank name tag. The way Richard stood beside someone else. The way he spoke around me, instead of to me. And then, Daniel's voice. Margaret. I could still hear it. Clear. Certain. Like someone calling me back into a space I had slowly stepped out of. Not by force. By habit. I reached for my purse. Opened it. Took out the card. Simple. Clean. No title. No need. Just a name. I turned it over once in my hand. Then set it down on the nightstand. Not as a decision. Just as a possibility. Because tonight hadn't been about him. It hadn't been about opportunity. It had been about recognition. And I had finally recognized something. About myself. I lay back against the pillows. Not to sleep. Just to be still. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to plan what came next. I didn't feel like I needed to solve anything. I just understood. Some things don't break loudly. They shift. Quietly. Until one day, you notice you're standing in a place that no longer feels like yours. And you have a choice. Stay or step away. I closed my eyes for a moment. Then opened them again. Because I wasn't tired. I was clear. Down the hallway, I could hear Richard moving. Slower than usual. More aware. As if he was trying to understand the space he was standing in now. I didn't go to him. And he didn't come to me. Not that night. Because there are moments when words don't help. When everything that needed to be said already has been. And anything else would just blur it. I turned onto my side. Facing the window. The faint glow of streetlights slipping through the curtains. Soft. Steady. Unbothered. Just like the world outside. Because no matter what shifts inside a home, the world keeps moving. Morning comes. Decisions follow. But tonight wasn't about decisions. It was about truth. And I finally had mine. I reached over and turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness. Not empty. Not lonely. Just quiet. And in that quiet, I realized something simple. I hadn't been pushed out of my life. I had been slowly stepping aside. Until I forgot I had the right to stand fully in it. But tonight changed that. Not because someone else saw me. Because I saw myself. Clearly. Completely. Without explanation. Without permission. And once you see yourself that way, you don't go back to being invisible. The next morning would come. And with it, choices. Conversations. Changes. But those belonged to tomorrow. Tonight was enough. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't wondering where I stood. I knew. And that certainty didn't feel loud. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt peaceful, like something that had been waiting for me all along. I closed my eyes again, and this time, I let the quiet stay, not as something to fill, but as something to keep. Because this story didn't end with a confrontation, or a victory, or even a decision. It ended with something stronger. Clarity. And sometimes, that's the only ending you need. Because once you have that, everything else knows exactly where to go. The next morning, I didn't wake up early. I didn't rush. I didn't replay the night before. I just got up. Calm. Clear. Certain. The house was quiet. Richard had already left. Of course he had. That was his pattern. Leave early. Avoid unfinished conversations. Control the timeline. But this time, the timeline wasn't his anymore. I made coffee. Sat at the same kitchen table where everything once started. And for the first time in years, I didn't think about what he needed. I thought about what I had overlooked. I reached into my purse, took out Daniel's card, ran my fingers across it once. Not emotional, not hesitant, just deliberate. Then I picked up the phone. I didn't call right away. I looked around the room first. At the walls, at the table, at the life I had built and slowly been moved out of. Then I dialed. One ring. Two. Margaret. He answered like he had been expecting me. I think we should talk, I said. A pause. Good, he replied. I was hoping you would. No questions. No surprise. Just readiness. I have time today, I added. I'll make time, he said. That difference mattered. We agreed to meet. Not at his office. Not somewhere formal. Somewhere neutral. Because this wasn't business. Not yet. But it was no longer personal either. When I hung up, I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel unsure. I felt aligned. And that's how I knew. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. The cafe was quiet. Mid-morning. Natural light. No pressure. Daniel was already there. Standing when I walked in. Not because he had to. Because he understood. You look different, he said. I sat down. I am. No explanation. No need. He didn't push. He simply opened a folder. Clean. Organized. Prepared. I reviewed the materials last night, he said. Of course he had. I had a feeling you might. He nodded. What you saw at home, he continued. That's not just restructuring. I didn't react. I already knew. That's control consolidation. There it was. Said plainly. Not emotionally. Accurately. He's moving assets into structures that minimize your influence, Daniel added. Minimize. Not remove. Because legally, that would be harder. He didn't expect resistance, I said. Daniel met my eyes. No, he replied. He expected silence. A pause. Then he turned the page. There's something else. I leaned forward slightly. Focused. Some of those early deals, he said, the ones that built his position. I already knew where this was going. You were involved. Not a question. A statement. I nodded once. Yes. He slid a document toward me. Your name is on more of this than he's accounting for. I looked down, and there it was. Not hidden. Just overlooked. Because no one thought I would look, or understand, or act. That changes things, Daniel said. I closed the folder slowly. Not rushed. Not shaken. Just aware. Yes, I said. It does. A small silence. Then he asked, what do you want to do? That question would have overwhelmed me before. Not now. I don't want anything taken from him, I said. Daniel watched me carefully. I want what was always mine to be recognized. That was the difference. Not destruction. Correction. He nodded. That's a stronger position. I stood up. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. Just ready. Then let's proceed properly, I said. And for the first time, I wasn't reacting to something. I was leading it. When I got home, Richard was already there. Waiting. That was new. He looked up as I walked in. Careful. Measured. Trying to read something he no longer understood. We need to talk, he said. I nodded. Yes. We do. I didn't sit. I didn't settle in. I remained standing. That mattered. Because posture changes power. I met with someone this morning, I said. His expression shifted slightly. Who? I held his gaze. You know who. Silence. Short. Sharp. You went to him? He asked. Not angry. Concerned. That was different. Yes. No explanation. No apology. Just truth. What did you tell him? Nothing he couldn't already see. I placed a folder on the table. The same kind he had kept in his office. Organized. Precise. But this one was mine. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at me first, trying to understand the shift, trying to measure how far it had gone. Margaret, his voice softened. Careful now. This doesn't have to become something bigger. I almost smiled. Not because it was funny, because it was familiar. It already is, I said. Calm. Clear. And I stepped back. Not away. Just into my own space. You tried to restructure things, I continued. I'm simply correcting the structure. That was it. No anger. No accusation. Just alignment. He opened the folder. Finally, his eyes moved across the pages. Slower with each line. Because now, he was the one catching up. And for the first time, he understood something. Not emotionally. Strategically. He hadn't removed me. He had underestimated me. You've been advised, he said quietly. I nodded. Yes. A pause. Then I added, properly. Silence. Longer this time. Because there was nothing left to control. Nothing left to redirect. Only reality. And it was sitting right there. On the table between us. I picked up my purse. Not rushed. Not final. Just complete. I'll give you time to review it, I said. And then I walked past him. The same way I had walked out of that ballroom. Not hidden. Not overlooked. Seen. By myself. And that was enough. Because in the end, he didn't lose me at the party. He lost me the moment he decided I didn't need to be seen. And that was the mistake he couldn't fix.